When I was 13, I wasn't in care at that point. I was in secondary school studying for not my GCSEs yet, but prior to my GCSEs.
Were you doing well at school or struggling or?
Yeah, so I was doing relatively okay. I think I was in like pretty much top classes for like maths and science and so on.
And then what was life like outside of school? Was that okay or struggling?
Outside of school, things were a little bit like rocky at home. I think being a teenager can be quite hard anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of was a little bit rebellious, but that wasn't picked up by school. Like when I tried to get help like through counselling and so on, that kind of wasn't offered to me as an opportunity because I did well within my grades and I was what people might consider a good student.
And when you were saying you were a little bit rebellious, what kind of things did that amount to?
So I would drink quite a lot. I would dabble with drugs, unprotected sex, kind of just hanging around with the wrong groups and similar things that's entailed with that.
You mentioned that you needed some support. You felt you needed some support when you were about 13. So how did that make you feel when you was kind of denied that support?
Yeah, so when I was denied that support, I think it kind of made me feel like it almost like invalidated my experience or issues. It's hard to see like the reality of things when you're a teenager because of the things are more important to you. So I just think, yeah, it was invalidated and it felt like basically people didn't care about me, which I guess contributed to me carrying on leading the lifestyle that I was leading and doing the things that I was doing because there was no real intervention or support for what was going on. At one point I did actually receive a counsellor, but again, it wasn't really like that tailored support that I needed. I was supposed to be getting a drug counsellor at the time, and because I think the waiting list was so long, they ended up giving me just a standard counsellor. I think that's what happened, and I think I did about a month or two of it maybe, and I did like cut down on the drugs at that point. But then after that, it was like, well, I don't really see any benefit that I'm getting for this or from it, so there's not much point in me continuing. And I think although it was supposedly like helping me, it didn't help the circumstances I was in. Like I felt like there needed to be some family intervention as opposed to just focusing on me in counselling, because yeah, whilst like cognitive behavioural therapy might have helped, I was still in that environment which wasn't going to be changed, and I couldn't do anything about that at the time.
So you said that the kind of support wasn't there. Was that kind of denied by school or parents or other people?
There was one point my parents tried to get counselling for me, and I think the teacher just referred me to like this online counselling, which wasn't really appropriate. It was just like, you know, a teenager having to go on and log on to some sort of website that they don't really know what they're doing. It wasn't useful. And I think at the time my parents wouldn't have been open to do like family therapy either or anything like that.
Could you tell us some of the times when your YPA has been really supportive and helped you?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the time for me it's practical, on a practical basis. I think having meetings with your YPA kind of as and when you need them really is really useful. So if I'm having like a bad time and I just need to talk to somebody, I can just ring her and be like, I'm going crazy, or just I need to have a rant about something. As well as one thing is where I started going to counselling and therapy, and she always blocks out like a couple of hours after I've finished my therapy. So I have that person who I can just sit and be with, and like we can grab a coffee and I can either talk or not talk to her about whatever I want. It's just having that somebody there for you to be there with whilst you're like processing everything, and so you don't feel like as alone and rubbish about things. That's one of the things that have been really useful to me, as well as not being judgmental. So kind of having understanding your situation and almost having a balanced perspective on things. So understanding like the reality of life and not having kind of like this idealistic view on things. So, and the struggles that you might be going through. I think it's really useful to have a good relationship with your YPA, so you can just talk and be honest about things.
So you mentioned there about therapy, and were there any stigma around kind of mental health and kind of opening up about that and asking for support?
Yeah, so definitely there have been some challenges with accessing support for mental health. I think first of all is like the waiting lists that you have to be on to actually get that support. That can take a long time, and then actually trying to access that support when you're having like an episode with your mental health. Sometimes you're not able to articulate or say how you feel and what's actually going on, because it's hard to see from that perspective because you're so ingrained into what's going on. So when trying to access that support, it's hard to like communicate with people what's actually happening, and you've got these worries of what judgments are they going to make of you. And if you've been in care, it's like the idea of, if they've got this preconceived idea about me being in care, will they treat me differently based on this? And I think sometimes that can actually happen, and some GPs don't have the in-depth knowledge about mental health that they kind of should have, which could avoid a lot of issues really.
So we know that a lot of care leavers suffer from poor mental health, particularly during COVID. Have you got any kind of coping strategies or tips that you could share?
Yeah, so there's quite a few. I tended to do a bit of meditation, physical exercise, even if it's just a walk around, like just get out the house and get some fresh air. It'd be really useful. Or just sitting and enjoying like a cup of tea or coffee or your favourite drink. Try and keep in contact with people, because sometimes you can isolate yourself when they can just be there to help lift your mood. I know that when I'm feeling bad or I'm having a bad day or so on, like I will make sure that I go to university or I go and see my friends, even if I might not feel like it, because I know that I'm going to feel better afterwards, after like communicating and just having a laugh and with friends. Just really focusing on now and like the next step within the day, not thinking too far forward. So thinking about all the overwhelming things you've got to do, just think about what next and take it one step at a time. Maybe some deep breathing if you're struggling in the moment, and just focus on the fact that you're okay now and that you're going to get where you need to go.